Hello everyone and welcome to Mind Masters 2020. My name is Boulevard, going to be bringing you the action here for this Japanese Invitational hosted by Riot Japan. This is going to be a standard 2-deck no-ban region-locked tournament for this Invitational. We do see Aclon versus Raasia getting us started off here in game number 1, match number 1 of the semifinals. The quarterfinals were unfortunately not streamed, so I do not have that footage available to you, but I'll be bringing you the semifinal and finals action here. Now, both these players are starting off with pretty standard decks. Frostbite midrange and Sea Monsters are decks that we've seen a lot of, also running pretty standard lists. Raasia has Lure of the Depths, which is a little bit strange for a deck like this, although it is something that we're seeing kind of get argued about more amongst Sea Monster players here going into the later stages of patch 1.6, and out of Aclon we have seen that adaptation that a lot of Frostbite midrange players have made, where you sort of cut the Reckless Trifarian, you cut the Cato the Arm, you keep in one Captain Pharaon, and that's really the only thing that is stuck across the adaptations of the Frostbite midrange to how it looked even back to patch 1.2. Versus the newer versions that came out, it has sort of made a return to form on the patch 1.2 decks, but Captain Pharaon sticking it out, still going to be in that deck. Now, Raasia going to get us started off here with the first bit of action, getting aggressive with this Thorny Toad. And Aclon, pretty inclined to block this. It is a free draw. It's not the most efficient way to do it. Pushing damage onto this Thorny Toad doesn't matter too much. Is actually just going to take the 1 damage. Says that doesn't matter to me too much. Gets the Avarosan Trapper down. We'll have to see just how soon that Yeti can come out. On the side of Raasia, Deadbloom Wanderer doesn't toss anything particularly impactful. Most of those cards were 3 ofs within the deck. 3 Grasp of the Undying, no Atrocity, no Vengeance, none of that nonsense coming out of this Sea Monster deck from Raasia. It is a pretty low to the ground curve on the spell lineup, just Jettison, Vile Feast, Lure, Savage, and Grasp of the Undying. All 3 ofs, but those are the only spells in the deck for this Sea Monster player. Now, do you see Ash come down on curve for Aclon? Going to be able to get pretty aggressive into this board. Going to Frostbite out, rather, the Deadbloom Wanderer, not stun it. It is still going to be able to block for the time being until that Ash does get leveled. Maokai going to be the response. Pretty early Yeti pickup for Aclon. Not going to come into play just yet, though, but will build up a pretty decently sized board for a Trifarian Assessor a little bit later on. And Maokai's actually even going to take a little bit of damage himself. Going to block onto this Avarosan Sentry. I feel like if we're going to block anything, I'd rather see the block onto the Avarosan Trapper. There's not a whole lot of difference between the Maokai being at 1 HP and 2 HP in a matchup like this. You know, there's not any damage-based removal coming out of Aclon, no Avalanche, none of that nonsense. Not that that would make a particular difference on the health total of the Maokai if it is 1 versus 2. Instead, going to be the block onto the Ash. Gets a toss out. There is 1 Lure of the Depths and 1 Devourer down the drain. Still going to be 5 damage pushed through. Raasia does have a lot of heal available to them in a deck like this. The Deadbloom Wanderer is still on field. No Frostbite effects in the hand of Aclon, but that Reckoning can come in big, and it can come in big this turn. Raasia, thinking about the Jaw Hunters, does go for it, and that is, we are down to 1 Vile Feast, and that is already in the hand of Raasia. Maokai tossing all of those away, saying we don't need those for this matchup. Grasp of the Undying is what we're trying to get to. And picks up, you know, a pretty unimpactful Sea Monster off of the Jaw Hunters, as well as 1 for turn. The problem that I have with the Terror of the Tides in this matchup specifically is that because Aclon is mostly going to be playing 5 attack units, the -2 attack only puts everything down to 3, and they are still fearsome blockers. We are going to see this Reckoning fired off by Aclon. Decides to get the board clear and kill the Maokai rather than go for something like a Yeti into an Assessor, and protects the Ash this way. This isn't going to be able to get challenged out by the Jaw Hunters. There's nothing in Raasia's hand to be able to counter this. The Ash is just outside of that Vile Feast range, and the Avarosan Sentry is going to pick up a Sejuani, so Aclon feeling like he's got a pretty good grasp on the game so far, and Raasia even going to have to Vile Feast here in order to just have a blocker for the Ash, not wanting to take another 5 damage on the open attack, since that Deadbloom Wanderer did never get to actually get its lifesteal off. And with 1 Grasp and 2 Vile Feasts gone from the tossing, Raasia actually pretty low on the amount of healing available to him. Now, we do see Grasp of the Undying picked up, and it's going to be Sejuani as the play for Raasia. And this is going to be able to push a lot of damage through this turn. It looks like Maokai is the contemplative redevelopment for Raasia. Isn't going to impact much this turn, but does set him up a little bit better going into the late game. Instead going to fire off this Grasp of the Undying onto the Ash. Pulls that one back. Maybe it's Maokai after all. Will float 3 spell mana into the turn 7 for the Nautilus to come down, but instead it will be the Grasp of the Undying. Perhaps Raasia, just a little bit too far away from deep, says even if I play Nautilus or Maokai now into Nautilus next turn, it's still not going to be a leveled Nautilus, and that's just not something I can get jiggy with. Aclon does, of course, play 3 copies of Culling Strike, as is sort of the standard for these Frostbite midrange decks. Let me check on that real quick, make sure I'm not lying. Yeah, it is 3 copies. So I've seen players play 2. I don't necessarily agree with it, but I just wanted to make sure that I wasn't being a liar, pants on fire. Raasia, picking up the Abyssal Eye is not really what you wanted this turn. I think Jaw Hunters probably would have been one of the most ideal pickups to play down alongside your Maokai. And then it's kind of on Aclon, you know, if Raasia opens with a Maokai, do you play the Culling Strike in response, or do you try and wait for something else to come out? You know, develop your own board, maybe play your Yeti, Culling Strike a little bit later on. I think it would be correct to throw out the Culling Strike immediately, and I think that's what Raasia is still kind of considering here. Is going to start us off with the Shipwreck Hoarder. It's going to toss a little bit, but not actually get us any closer to deep, because it does put the 2 treasures back in the deck. So 22 cards in the deck for Raasia here. I'm pausing because I'm trying to figure out how Aclon is actually going to navigate this turn. Yeti into Trifarian Assessor is 2 draws, that's very good, but you generally like to get your Hearthguard down before you start drawing a bunch of cards. And it looks like it is going to be Iceveil Archer now onto the Shipwreck Hoarder. This does still mean that Hearthguard or Yeti Assessor is still on the table. And it looks like we're going to go for Yeti Assessor. This sets up a much better open attack. Aclon going for the Blood in the Water that he smells right now. Actually going to be the Culling Strike onto the Shipwreck Hoarder instead. The Iceveil Archer Culling Strike. Very powerful combo. And this does set up a 13 damage open attack from Aclon. If we see Fury of the North off the top, which we do not, I don't even think it's in the deck, actually. I see it played so often in this deck, but it's always Sejuani's Fury of the North. So, you know, it could have top decked to Sejuani, would have turned into Fury of the North. That could have been a potential lethal. Is actually just going to go for the not open attack here. Going to play the Captain Pharaon, develop the board a little bit, understanding that Raasia probably doesn't have anything that's going to be able to stop this. This does represent a lot more damage, and now even if you do block the 5/5 with whatever you play, that is still lethal damage coming in from Aclon. Has found the last couple of points of damage, and even if you do manage to survive this turn, somehow, if Raasia can find what it takes to actually survive this turn, which I believe means playing Nautilus and blocking the Captain Pharaon with that, you just die to a Decimate from Aclon next turn as soon as they get their first priority sequence. Even has the mana for 2 Decimates if you do manage to find a Grasp of the Undying or something to get yourself out of that range. And I think we have entered Limbo, the state where the game is over but has not quite ended yet, and Raasia just has to turmoil over their options on how to survive this turn, how to survive the triple Decimate of Aclon, and this is exactly why we see the Captain Pharaon as the consistent card that has stayed in the Frostbite decks despite the iterations coming out of them. Here we are going to see the block from the Nautilus. This is going to take a lot of damage from the Captain Pharaon, and that's 3/5/5 for 13 total damage pushed through at Raasia. And this is just going to be lethal on the following turn. Doesn't matter what they top deck, even if it is Grasp of the Undying. There are 2 Decimates available for Aclon this turn. And Raasia doesn't have a hope, is just going to mull over their options though. That's sort of the whole point of Limbo. It's this weird casting gray area where the game is over. There is no sequence of cards that Raasia could possibly top deck here to win the game. I am discounting Treasure Trove to an extent. You know, you could salvage into the Trove, play the Trove, see where that gets you, and maybe then we exit Limbo. I feel like Treasure Trove is the only card that really lets you exit Limbo. But as far as the actual main deck lists are concerned, there's nothing that Raasia can draw here to get out of this situation. Aclon is just going to have lethal as soon as he gets that first priority sequence. Now that we are down to 4 mana, even if we saw the Treasure Trove picked up, would not be enough. And I think that's what Raasia was digging for on that first salvage, just really understanding that's my only option at winning this game. My open attack doesn't come anywhere near killing him. Even if he lets it go, there's no atrocity coming out of Raasia. Has no hope in this game. It's just as soon as this priority gets over to Aclon, and it will just be a couple more seconds here, we see the timer ticking down on Raasia in this game number 1, but it's a best of 3. You still got a little bit more time to play, but this game, my friend, is over. There is the Decimate. There is the confirmation, there is the axe, and there is the drop of the Nexus HP to a -2. That is going to be Aclon picking up game number 1. So if you have not seen a Legends of Runeterra tournament in this format before, let me just break it down for you real quick as we get into game number 2 here. Both of these players have brought 2 decks. They are not allowed to overlap their regional composition between either of those decks, meaning they're not allowed to play the same region twice. And once you win with a deck, then you have to put it down. You're not allowed to play with it anymore. And once you win with both of your decks, you are considered the winner of the match. So this is a best 2 out of 3. Aclon picks up game number 1 with the Frostbite midrange. Now I'm going to switch over to the Twisted Fate Ezreal, while Raasia sticks onto the Sea Monsters. And critically, we already see 3 Grasp of the Undyings gone for Raasia. 2 of them are tossed. 1 is in the hand. We are down to our last Grasp. And that's actually pretty impactful. That is the only answer, at least at fast speed, that Raasia has to kill an Ezreal. The other one is Devourer of the Depths, but that one is a little bit more easily disrupted, and Aclon holds on to mana going into turn 2 so that he can get down double Jagged Butcher with the warning shot. Early aggro isn't necessarily something that's going to work super well against sea monsters, but it is going to kill one of the units for Aclon, or for Raasia, going to push a lot of damage onto the Thorny Toad as well. And these aren't going to die when, or the Jagged Butchers rather, are not going to die when all is said and done after all of these blocks come out. And Raasia has the sort of hand to stave off this early aggression from Aclon. We could even see a Thermo Beam onto this Dead Bloom Wanderer. I don't think it's necessarily the most wild thing you could possibly do. Could also see Make It Rain into Thermo Beam if he wants to. If he high rolls, hits all 3 units, then you can Thermo Beam to finish off the Dead Bloom. Or, you know, even if you high roll, hit the 2 1/1s, hit the face, then throw that down. And we're actually going to see the Make It Rain come out first, but unfortunately missing one of the 1/1s and pushing 1 damage onto the Dead Bloom Wanderer. I was trying to quickly go through the instances of how this Make It Rain plays it out, but we do just see it come out, so we're going to get to see that one in real time. Dead Bloom Wanderer probably going to hit face here, and then the Thermo Beam going to come out and finish that one off. Aclon would have loved to be able to clean up that Dredgers as well, but not going to be the case, and that is totally fine. Twisted Fate, or not Twisted Fate rather, Ezreal currently sitting at 3 out of 8. Pretty close to that level up, and Raasia understanding, or Aclon rather, understanding that Raasia doesn't have any super impactful plays from about turn 4 to turn 5. You know, turn 6 is where we could see Devourer of the Depths come out and Aclon doesn't have a response or something like that, but wants to keep the pressure on, doesn't go for an open attack, says I would much rather push a little bit of damage onto whatever unit you're playing. Jaw Hunters would have sort of been the one punish, but you would like to think that Jaw Hunters would have come out over the Dead Bloom on turn 3. Maybe not, maybe the Make It Rain looked a little bit too juicy, but Aclon calls his bluff, said I think that Dead Bloom Wanderer was all you had for turn 3. Throws down the Yordle Grifter, gets a little bit rewarded for it. And now we're going to see Raasia throw out the blocks again, continue to soften up these Butchers. But once again, not looking too great on the turn 5 to 6 area. This Lore of the Depths, rather, sorry. Almost said Devourer because I knew I was going to end my sentence with of the Depths. And if that gets an Abyssal Eye, it could be played this turn. Doesn't have the mana for Devourer left over, as it will only be 5 mana after the fact. Let's see what comes off the lore, everyone. It is the Devourer of the Depths that he so critically needed. Unfortunately, just going to be 1 mana shy of actually playing that one out. And going to pass over, decides to hang on to the spell mana rather than play the Maokai, of course. It is a soft pass, meaning that priority will go back to Raasia once all is said and done because it was a burst speed spell. So Aclon has to decide whether they want to develop or give Raasia the opportunity to just end the turn. It looks like it will be a Zaunite Urchin discarding the warning shot. Going to pick up a Thermogenic Beam. Not the most impactful card in a matchup like this. I think sort of the ideal that we're looking for right now is something like a Mystic Shot to stop this Devourer next turn. Raasia contemplating the Maokai, understanding that Thermo Beam is the only answer for that in a 1-card sort of situation. Did see a Thermo Beam a turn before. I think it's pretty reasonable to throw down this Maokai, as you are pretty likely to play Devourer next turn, and you can't get that down in the same turn as the Grasp of the Undying anyway. That is a 10 mana play. You will only have 9 available too, so we are going to throw out the Maokai, and I think that's going to be the Thermo Beam out of Aclon. Could go for the Twisted Fate if he really wants to, or even the Petty Officer to set up the most valuable sort of open attack you could find. Could even play Petty Officer into the Thermogenic Beam if we are so inclined, but that's kind of a really wide, sort of weak board. Your opponent's going to be at 19 because you killed the Thorny Toad. And then Maokai still has pretty okay blocks onto either the Petty Officer if he just wants to prevent the most damage. Could also just block the Zonite Urchin if we're looking to be stat efficient with our trades here. And what are we looking at? It is just going to be Thermo Beam onto the Maokai. Taking the safe play, not wanting to get too fancy along the way. And Raasia not going to attack with that Thorny Toad. It would just die. It'd die in vain as well. Static Shock picked up now for Aclon, who might go for something like a Twisted Fate red card. Contemplating the options. Petty Officer could come out as well. Historically, there's not a lot of punishes that Deep has for, you know, you not going for an open attack, for you developing before you actually go into your combat phase. I think that's what Aclon is seriously considering here. If you do just go for the open attack, you're only pushing 6 damage when all is said and done. You know, you are going to lose your Jagged Butcher to this Thorny Toad. Your opponent's going to go up to 19. Yeah, there we see the 11 life is what is going to be left for Raasia when all is said and done, who is actually getting pretty close to this deep turn, as well as the Nautilus coming online. I don't think a whole lot has been tossed so far. We're actually just going to see Grasp of the Undying onto the... I don't know why you would ever block the Zonite Urchin instead of the Jagged Butcher. The Jagged Butcher strictly represents more damage. And this would bring the life totals about as close to even as they've been this entire game at 16 to 15. Was just a small delay on the stream there for a second. Looks like they're still having a couple technical issues. Looks to be mostly resolved at this point. Looks like Aclon's hand isn't having any problem going through. We still see a little bit of action there, but things are stumbling a little bit on Raasia's side. If you're wondering if this is your computer, it is not. It is unfortunately the stream. It looks like Raasia might be having a couple of issues. Now, this is a LAN event, so that is something that's always kind of cool to see. Don't have those in the West just yet, but our Eastern friends are kind of paving the way for us. A lot of Korean invitationals. This is, to my knowledge, the first streamed Japanese invitational. So excited to kind of get a peek into what their meta looks like. And so far, pretty par for the course. The worldwide meta seems to have settled out pretty evenly across the board here. None of these decks are particularly new to us, and they seem to be pretty standard builds as well. Here we are going to see the Nautilus come down. Salvage going to come out of Aclon, wants to develop a little bit more. Can get the Petty Officer down if he wants to go wide, bank a little bit of spell mana. Of course, could go for the Yordle Grifter as well. Here we're going to see the Jettison attack with the Nautilus, and that does mean that Jagged Butcher is going to have to block this one unless Aclon decides that they are okay, taking a whopping 13 damage to the face. There's no atrocity in Raasia's deck. So, we could see Aclon play a little bit risky with their life total and not feel too threatened about that. There's really no way for Raasia to push through that last little bit of damage unless he can find a Abyssal Eye, as there are no elusive blockers in Aclon's deck other than Ezreal. Oh, gets the Lonely Poro, gonna get the tough Poro. Would have loved a Daring Poro. As I mentioned, the elusive blocker could come in big, even though Raasia does have the Vile Feast to take that one out. Now it is the attack turn for Aclon, but Raasia has found the life total lead for the first time in this game, and Aclon really doesn't close it super well here. Raasia is going to have to block one of these units. I think I like the attack with the Twisted Fate. As you are kind of setting your opponent up for a burn finish. You theoretically have 4 damage in your hand for the face, between the Make It Rain, the Warning Shot, the Static Shock, and the Warning Shot that will be represented by that Yordle Grifter. So as long as you're pushing through 11 damage this turn, which you are doing exactly if the block onto the Twisted Fate comes out from this Nautilus, but instead it's going to be Riptide onto the Nautilus, block onto the Petty Officer, and a Vile Feast onto the Black Market Merchant, that is nowhere near enough damage. Raasia is going to be in a commanding position, will start to get to take control of the board and the game back for themselves, as they can throw down the Devourer of the Depths after this fact, but Raasia is really low on cards. Unless we can find a salvage here to refuel soon, the Nautilus isn't really going to represent a whole lot other than a big mighty beefstick, but it could be enough to actually close out the game on Aclon, who is looking at a pretty low life total. Devourer here comes down onto the Jagged Butcher, I would think, to clear through that one last pesky fearsome blocker, but instead passes it back over to Aclon, who does get the Yordle Grifter out, understanding that Raasia has the next attack token, doesn't need to further develop on the turn, can see what Aclon wants to play first, as in the non-Ionia versions of the Ezreal decks, not really any massive punishes for developing pre-combat. You know, there is Riptide Rex to consider, but Riptide's not a card that we see play particularly well into Sea Monsters. Nautilus soaks up those bullets spectacularly, and it would still take 4 shots on the Devourer to actually kill that one out. Jaw Hunter's probably one of the best pickups Raasia could have hoped for, is going to get another reduced cost Sea Monster, and Shipwreck Hoarder, one of my personal favorites. We have seen these treasures swing games, especially control matchups, so many times in the past, and while this isn't sort of a typical control Ezreal deck, you know, it is something that Raasia could end the game with here relatively soon. Shipwreck Hoarder going to come down now. Deadbloom Wanderer can even follow it up, see if we can toss one of those treasures away to get into it. We're just going to have a switch on perspectives as Raasia's stream continuing to find some technical difficulties. Get a, you know, non-upside down look at Aclon's hand, who is going to fire off this 8-mana Thermogenic Beam now onto the Shipwreck Hoarder. That is the Ezreal leveling up. Okay, no treasures tossed from the Deadbloom Wanderer. Instead, getting rid of a few Sea Monsters. Here we see Devourer of the Depths onto one of those fearsome blockers. Aclon has 4 damage in hand, but with this Deadbloom Wanderer, Raasia is going to heal up to a pretty impactful life total, and I don't think there's a whole lot that Aclon can do to come back into this. I think it has to very specifically be top deck the Ezreal, and if that happens, we can see Aclon take this game away. They are currently sitting at 8 out of 8 Ezreal targets, and there's a Riptide Rex. Not exactly what you wanted. Normally this would be the dream scenario for the Crocodile, but as we see here, Nautilus going to soak up 6 of those 7 bullets. Riptide has his eyes set on the Diver. Says, these are my waters, what are you doing here? Nautilus just eats up that cannon barrage and says, no, these are my waters, what are you doing here? And now Aclon is all but out of this game. That Abyssal Eye does currently represent lethal, and there's nothing that Aclon can actually do to stop that one. This will just be game number 2. Going over to Raasia, going to tie up the series 1-1 here in our first semifinals match of the Riot Japan Mind Masters Invitational. $75,000 on the line from my understanding. A lot of buzz about that here in the West. That is a pretty big prize pool, I believe. The largest that we've seen out of Legends of Runeterra thus far. I think Twitch Rivals might have been $100,000, so technically speaking, I believe if that is the case, then the West has had the biggest prize pool to date. But that was an invitational. This is also an invitational. How do you get invited to these, you ask? I don't know. I'm the guy behind the desk. I don't get invited to these things. I just talk about them. And speaking of talking, it's going to be Raasia walking the walk, talking the talk, tying up the series 1-1. We are just one short game away from our first finalist being decided. Aclon going to stick with the Twisted Fate Ezreal, and Raasia going to move over to the Frostbite midrange. Now, this is a, you know, a matchup that we've seen quite a few times over the course of the last couple of tournaments. Twisted Fate Ezreal has come out in patch 1.6 as sort of the premier Ezreal deck. It's falling a little bit behind now in the later weeks. Karma Ezreal is coming back in a pretty big way. And Bilgewater is committed elsewhere for a couple of reasons, for a couple of decks, but Frostbite midrange, something that has been here since the beginning and has stuck it out. The builds might have changed a little bit, but the core concepts are all there. It's only about a 5-card difference from what we were seeing for the most part throughout patch 1.6, so just going to have its return to form. Aclon going to get us started off here with the Zonite Urchin, going to get met out by the Omen Hawk. And perhaps thinking about just taking this trade anyway. Aclon has a very high amount of nab in their hand. Black Market Merchant, Pilfered Goods, and Yordle Grifter. And there's nothing that Raasia actually has to just stop all of that from going off. Unfortunately for Aclon, it's going to be a little bit before they can get all of this down in the same turn. Actually going to use the Make It Rain here in order to try and preserve the Zonite Urchin to trigger the Pilfer on the next turn. or trigger the plunder rather on the next turn so that the black market merchant can get through. But Raasia responds with one of the most threatening things you could possibly see, a 2/2 Omen Hawk, implying that we're just going Omen Hawk into Omen Hawk, maybe even into Omen Hawk. No, it's an Avarosan Trapper. But that is going to be a 5/5 Trapper. Ooh, and it looks like Raasia's thinking about just playing the 3/3 Trapper. Nope, it is hovering this 5/5. It does curve pretty well into this Trifarian Assessor. It's not the most value that you could ever get off an Assessor, especially knowing that you've got a couple of Yetis coming in your top 5 or 6 cards, depending on when these Trappers come out. They could be spread out a little bit. Here we are going to see the 5/5 come down. And I think the consideration that Raasia had for playing the 3/3 Trapper on this turn was just that, you know, I don't want to necessarily have damage pushed onto my 5/5 Trapper if I am trying to keep this around for an Assessor draw. It does pick up the Ash. So another 5 attack unit on the side of Raasia. It's not totally safe to attack with this Ash. It's pretty safe to attack with the Ash because you do have that 1 mana and the Brittle Steel available to you. But Aclon now has a warning shot, but not enough mana to play the Black Market Merchant alongside the Pilfered Goods. Could play the Yordle Grifter this turn, but generally you want to wait until the Merchant is out there before you play the Grifter so that you can get maximum value, getting the cost reduction onto the card. But honestly, I think it might be a little bit too awkward for Aclon if he doesn't throw out the Grifter this turn. You know, if you warning shot into Merchant and then play Pool Shark, all of a sudden you have to use the warning shot from the Yordle Grifter in order to turn on the Pilfered Goods next turn. And yeah, I like this a lot. You don't get the cost reduction, but I don't think it actually matters as much as the tempo lost from just going for these plays on your turn. So the Pilfered Goods nerf actually coming in pretty big here. Previously, we would have been able to see Aclon fire off a warning shot into the Black Market, into the Pilfered Goods, but being at 3 mana, the card definitely feels a lot more fair. Its playability has fallen off in most versions of the NAB deck, but Ezreal still bringing 2 to 3 copies depending on who you ask. There's another Pilfered Goods. We're going to see the warning shot into the Black Market Merchant. Picks up a 4 mana Hearthguard. Going to follow that up with the Pilfered Goods. And what can we steal out of Raasia's deck? Still hasn't found the Yeti, so that one is coming as late as possible. A little unfortunate. But what are we going to get from the bottom? Here we see another Iceveil Archer and a Culling Strike. So Aclon actually picks up the Iceveil Culling Strike combo. Sort of one of the best removal tools in the game. Gets it for 3 mana, going to be able to play it all for 3 mana, and that's even going to help the Ezreal tick towards its level up. Iceveil Archer, a staple in the Frostbite Ezreal lists, and looks like Aclon has sort of acclimated his game plan a little bit, saying, you know what, you've got all these Frostbite effects, they're pretty cool, they help out my Ezreal, let's throw one down here onto this Ashe. You know, if you want to attack with her, you are going to have damage pushed back onto her, but yeah, the Assessor is also stonewalled by this. If you play it now, you're not getting the value from your Ashe. And that doesn't feel good. It's just going to take the reduced draw. Going to get the Yeti and the Brittle Steel. Now we see the Culling Strike down onto the Ashe. And that does mean that Raasia is going to be able to replace that with the Yeti before they go into their attacks. And we are pretty quickly approaching this Captain Pharaon turn, which is the same as the Riptide Rex turn, but Aclon doesn't have the Rex available to him just yet. We saw Aclon close out a game earlier with that Captain Pharaon and those multiple decimates. Can Raasia do the same? Iceveil Archer number 2 says, not so fast, buckaroo. Come into my rodeo, you're not going to have any attack points for a little while. Full suite of attacks coming out of Raasia, minus the Frostbitten Yeti. It'd be a little bit weird to attack with that. With 3 mana on the side of Raasia, these Brittle Steels represent a pretty big swing in the board here. Even if Aclon can line up his blocks in an effective manner, it's just going to be softening up things like the Yeti and the Avarosan Trapper. Could try to trade onto the smaller Trapper as well as the Avarosan, or the, not Avarosan, she is a Trifarian Assessor. These A words, they're getting to me. And Raasia might not even throw out the Brittle Steels. It doesn't really matter to him that much. His turn 7 is looking a little bit of awkward, and you really only need to float 1 mana into turn 9 to get off the double decimate. So we could see the Brittle Steels here. I don't think they're going to get a whole lot of value later on. I'm just a little curious to see if we are going to protect the Assessor and the small Trapper, or if we are going to preserve health on the Yeti to make it a little bit harder to remove, as Thermogenic Beam, really the only thing that can come out of Aclon. We're not seeing any of the 3 damage spells, no gotchas, no get excited. We still do see a couple of Static Shocks. A card that has kind of started to fall to the wayside in very recent memory. A couple of players in Duels of Runeterra 14 only running 1 copy, some running 0, but Aclon has brought the 2. It's still a card that I like. Getting the Ezreal level up quickly is something that I value in this kind of build in particular. Only 1 Brittle Steel fired off, going to save the Assessor. It's going to be a big board swing for Raasia. All of his units are down to 2 HP, which does mean 1 Riptide Rex shot apiece. Aclon has a little bit of a strange turn. You can throw down the Hearthguard, buff up your deck, then go for something like a Pool Shark and a Zonite Urchin. Let's try and draw some of those cards, get them down on the next turn. You see the Harsh Winds picked up for Raasia. That's currently more or less a nothing play. If we find the Ash, we could try and get a surprise OTK next turn. Not the case just yet. You could go for the Pilfered Goods with this warning shot, but it does mean that if you top deck a Riptide Rex, you're going to be in a bit of an awkward spot for when that happens. Not going to have any way to immediately turn that on. And honestly, I don't think stealing from your opponent's deck is the most impactful thing you could be doing right now. I like getting started off with the Hearthguard. I think this telegraphs either the Pool Shark or the Zonite Urchin or both. I think the Pool Shark comes out first. I think you struggle a little bit with the decision on what to discard for this Zonite Urchin, but honestly, it might have to be the Pilfered Goods. Here we see the Pool Shark. Does the Urchin come down as well? I think it's don't play Urchin or it's discard the Pilfered Goods, and that's kind of a tough decision to make. I think the warning shot is just a little bit too valuable. And we are just going to see, don't play the Urchin. Static Shock, the fleeting pickup by the Pool Shark. Now Aclon going to throw out the full suite of attacks. Picks up the second Harsh Winds. That's not great, but it doesn't always matter when you have Captain Pharaon available to you. He will just end the game on his own. He doesn't really care what comes down beside him. Going to 13 does mean that Aclon will just be outside of the range of the triple decimate that could come down over the course of the next couple of turns. Of course, the one thing that a lot of people seem to forget about is that decimate's not the only problem you have to deal with. Captain Pharaon is still an 8/8 with Overwhelm, and unless Aclon finds a Thermogenic Beam specifically, he's not going to be able to actually kill that Pharaon. Can't even steal a Harsh Winds out of Raasia's deck, as both are in the hand. Flash Freeze, not a card that's in the main deck. So Aclon could be falling to this Captain Pharaon here. Gave it pretty good in game number 1, going to get it back in game number 3. Captain Pharaon apparently just the deciding factor of the match between these two players. Looks like Harsh Winds is being considered here to continue to preserve the massive board that Raasia has built for himself. It would mean that Pharaon doesn't come down this turn. Instead, we're going to see Brittle Steel onto the Black Market Merchant. And actually, yeah, Harsh Wind's going to come out as well. So Pharaon going to be a little bit delayed. I don't think that matters a whole lot in the grand scheme of the match. Here we see Static Shock number 2. And now we're going to see, it looks like Petty Officer. Not sure how far this Ezreal is off of leveling. I think with this second Static Shock, should be pretty close. And this one will actually be able to pick up the Yeti as well as the Avarosan Trapper. So Aclon retaking control of the board. Will this level the Ezreal? There's a Riptide Rex and the Ezreal is leveled. Captain Pharaon didn't come down on turn 8, and Aclon could turn this one around with the Riptide. Is going to be the case, is going to clear the board. Sejuani probably going to have to come down defensively. I don't think Harsh Winds necessarily has to be used. But with the Mystic Shot in hand, Aclon even has an activator for the Pilfered Goods. This is not really a 20-0 type of Ezreal deck, though, and there's not a whole lot of spells left in Raasia's deck for them to steal with the Pilfered Goods. Sejuani looking like they're going to be the play. Going to reduce the attack of this Hearthguard, saying if you want to attack with this Riptide Rex, you can be my guest. I have the Harsh Winds available. I will put this Riptide in the dirt, and that is going to be the case. 3 damage going to be pushed through by onto Raasia rather. Bring these life totals away from even down to 12 for Raasia, who has suddenly seemingly lost control of this game. That Riptide Rex was a massive swing for Aclon right on time. Captain Pharaon has not found the time to come down just yet. But now we are into turn 10. No spell mana banked, so Fury of the North can't come down alongside it. It looks like Raasia is even considering what happens, you know, if I play this Babbling Bjerg. Can I get an Ash? She will be leveled at this point. Can I go for lethal with that? Decides the answer is no, even alongside this Fury of the North. And it looks like Raasia is playing very respectful of either Twisted Fate or more copies of Riptide Rex, not going for the Captain Pharaon pre-combat. And Twisted Fate is not something I would necessarily call a big punish. You play Pharaon, Twisted Fate is played and stuns your Pharaon, and you're kind of just back to where you were. I don't think Twisted Fate is what you were worried about blocking your Sejuani. So we do see Captain Pharaon come down. I do think this means we have to see the gold card out of Aclon unless he thinks he can pick up the win right here, right now with this Ezreal. But I don't think you need to do that. I think you're pretty safe to gold card and develop the Ezreal after the fact. Raasia doesn't have... Raasia doesn't have Culling Strike mana immediately available to them or Reckoning mana. You can go for an open attack. And I really would be remiss if we didn't see this gold card off the Twisted Fate. That is what we are going to see. Oh, never mind. We're going to see a blue card. Deciding that he can go ahead and take the damage. He will finish this one off with an open attack. He just needs some spells for the Ezreal. Playing offensively rather than defensively. Here we're going to see the warning shot and just going to confirm the attack as well. Says, I will go to 2. I am going to kill you before you can play any of these decimates. The open attack should be able to get it done. No blocker for the Ezreal. No Culling Strike to stop it. Going to fire off the warning shot. Or not the warning shot, rather the Make It Rain. It's going to be 3 damage pushed at the face of Raasia. Down to 9. Probably going to see the Pilfered Goods right now. What can we steal? Culling Strike and Avarosin. Nope, not Avarosin. Trifarian Assessor. Still mixing up those A names. My apologies. And this should just be Aclon picking this one up on the open attack, or at least with the Mystic Shot in response. And with the warning shot off the top, that is going to super secure it here for Aclon, who does just have lethal with the warning shot and the Mystic Shot, regardless of whether or not these attacks are stopped. And of course, not all of these attacks can be stopped. No Culling Strike off the top does mean Ezreal is going to get through. And it looks like Raasia is actually just going to die in combat. You know, Ezreal not even going to have to get this one done. Captain Pharaon coming down just a little bit too late to the party. And Raasia not able to repeat Aclon's success of game number 1. Does mean Aclon is our first finalist here in the Mind Masters 2020 tournament, hosted by Riot Japan. I will be back soon with the other semifinals match for you guys. Congratulations to Aclon and Raasia. My condolences.